The illusion of endless learning in self-help. The seduction of a slogan. Learning never ends. It's a phrase you'll hear at school graduations, in corporate training sessions, and plastered across the coaching and self-help world. It has all the right emotional notes, optimistic, forward-looking, and flattering to the person who believes it. Who doesn't want to think of themselves as a lifelong learner, always expanding, always becoming more? But slogans have a habit of concealing as much as they reveal. The problem with learning never ends isn't that it's wrong in every case. The problem is that the phrase has been hijacked by industries that confuse reinforcement with education, marketing with discovery, and echo chambers with actual growth. So let's look at what we mean by learning, how the self-help industry repackages reinforcement as growth, and why the learning never ends mantra can just as easily become a trap as it can an inspiration. What real learning looks like. Before we can talk about illusions, we need to define the real thing. Learning, in its most practical sense, is the acquisition of knowledge or skills you did not previously possess. It could be learning how to code in Python, studying how climate systems work, mastering the craft of carpentry, or speaking a new language. The common denominator is that you now have an ability you did not have before. Real learning is messy. It requires time, repetition, and often failure. It pushes you into unfamiliar territory where your previous assumptions don't hold. A math student who shifts from arithmetic to calculus is forced to abandon old shortcuts and retrain their brain. A musician picking up a new instrument has to relearn muscle memory. These are genuine expansions of capacity. Contrast that with simply doing the same thing over and over. If you're a runner who takes the same 5 kilometers route every morning, you might get slightly faster, but you're not learning much after a certain point. You're reinforcing. This distinction is obvious in the world of skills. Yet once we shift into the territory of personal development, things get murkier. The shift from skills to self-help ideologies. Somewhere along the way, the idea of lifelong learning stretched beyond practical skills and academic knowledge. It was absorbed into the growing industry of self-help and coaching. Suddenly, learning wasn't just about understanding calculus or coding. It was about learning to master your mindset, learning to communicate better, or learning to live your best life. On the surface, that might sound like progress. Who wouldn't want to learn how to manage emotions more effectively or resolve conflict more gracefully? But the terrain quickly shifts. Rather than teaching grounded psychological skills, much of the coaching industry built itself on frameworks like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, disc profiling, integral leadership, and endless variations on mindset training. These frameworks are often marketed as revolutionary, but most are cobbled together from half-digested snippets of psychology, mixed with pseudoscience, and wrapped in slogans. You might take a course in NLP, then another in disc, enneagrams, then another in emotional mastery. Each time you are told you are learning. But in reality, you're being inducted into a system of language and belief. That's not quite the same thing. Reinforcement masquerading as growth. Here's where the illusion sets in. Self-help is very good at creating the feeling of progress. You attend a weekend seminar and feel energized. You read a book that reframes a familiar struggle, and it feels like an insight. You sit in a coaching session where your beliefs are mirrored back at you in new terminology, and you walk away thinking you've had a breakthrough. But much of this is reinforcement. The industry thrives on recycling the same content. Dozens of habits, books that all cite each other and lead back to the same studies from decades ago. Leadership frameworks that dress up common sense in quadrant diagrams and acronyms. Personal growth programs that promise transformation, but mostly teach participants to repeat the language of the program itself. It's no different from a church sermon rephrased week after week. It feels new because of the delivery, but the core message doesn't change. Reinforcement has value in moderation. Repetition helps ideas stick. But when repetition is dressed up as new learning, the effect is stasis disguised as movement. You believe you're climbing a mountain when in fact you're walking in circles. The comfort of echo chambers. Why does this illusion hold such power? Because echo chambers are comforting. Real learning exposes you to challenge and contradiction. It risks embarrassment. It forces you to confront your own ignorance. Echo chambers do the opposite, they validate you. They create the sense that you are part of a chosen group that gets it. In the self-help world, echo chambers are built into the business model. Coaching groups, masterminds, and online communities are designed to reward agreement and police skepticism. If you question too much, you're labeled negative or told you're not in alignment. Inside this environment, almost anything can be framed as learning. Repeating the same affirmation until it becomes automatic. Discovering the same principle under a different name. Reinforcing beliefs that fit the ideology. It feels like growth because it is accompanied by group validation. But the growth is horizontal, not vertical. You spread further into the echo chamber, but you don't actually expand beyond it. The pseudoscience problem. One of the reasons reinforcement feels like learning in coaching culture is the reliance on pseudoscience. Take NLP, for example. It borrows language from psychology, anchoring, metaprograms, reframing, but strips it of evidence. It takes a scientific-sounding vocabulary and uses it to sell techniques that have little empirical support. Or look at the surge of manifesting trends. Here, concepts from quantum physics are mangled to suggest your thoughts can attract wealth. Energy, vibration, and alignment are treated as interchangeable scientific and spiritual terms, even though they belong to very different worlds. Even frameworks like Maslow's hierarchy, which at least originated from psychology, are rewritten and marketed to suit coaching programs. Suddenly, self-transcendence becomes a commodity you can buy for the price of a weekend seminar. Pseudoscience gives the appearance of depth. It convinces participants that they are learning profound truths. But what they are actually doing is absorbing the language of a belief system. They are learning how to talk like a coach, not how to understand reality. Growth or contraction? This brings us to the real fork in the road. Is lifelong learning expansive or contractive? Expansion means developing new skills, understanding more of the world, and increasing your capacity to navigate complexity. It's uncomfortable, sometimes humbling, and rarely finished. Contraction means narrowing your worldview into a self-reinforcing bubble. It often feels like growth because you master the vocabulary of the bubble. But you're not expanding into the world, you're retreating into ideology. In coaching and personal development spaces, much of what passes for growth is actually contraction. People are told they are evolving when in fact they are just learning how to speak in the language of the program, reframing, anchoring, manifesting, breaking through. It's like learning a dialect that only works inside one community. The more fluent you become, the less you can communicate outside of it. Why the illusion persists? If the illusion is so shallow, why does it persist? First, it feels good. Who doesn't want to believe they are constantly growing? The language of breakthroughs and transformations is flattering. Second, the industry profits from it. If learning never ends, then neither does your need for the next course, the next book, the next retreat. Lifelong learning becomes lifelong consumption. Third, our culture rewards the identity of being a lifelong learner. On LinkedIn, it's a badge of honor. On Instagram, it's a hashtag. Being seen as someone committed to growth is a form of status, regardless of whether the growth is real. Finally, real learning is harder. It demands patience, humility, and evidence. It might require admitting that your favorite coaching technique is bunk. Pseudoscience is easier, it offers certainty, it never threatens to prove you wrong, and it always flatters your sense of progress. What gets lost? The tragedy of the learning never ends mantra, when hijacked by self-help culture, is that it dilutes the value of actual learning. Instead of grappling with complex knowledge or developing tangible skills, people get caught in loops of affirmation and pseudoscience. Years can be spent inside programs that promise endless growth, only for participants to find themselves no more capable outside the echo chamber than when they started. What gets lost is curiosity, the genuine drive to seek out knowledge that could challenge or change you. What gets lost is evidence, the ability to separate useful insight from comforting illusion. And what gets lost is humility, the recognition that learning often means unlearning what you thought you knew. Reclaiming learning. If learning never ends is to mean anything worthwhile, it needs to be grounded in reality. Signs you're genuinely learning. You can demonstrate new skills or knowledge outside the context of a seminar. You encounter challenges and contradictions that force you to adapt. You change your mind when faced with credible evidence. Signs you're only reinforcing. Every new idea feels suspiciously like an old one with different branding. Growth is defined by the language you use rather than the skills you develop. The only people who recognize your progress are those inside the same echo chamber. Reclaiming learning means resisting the temptation to treat slogans as substance. It means seeking out evidence, welcoming discomfort, and recognizing that sometimes the truest growth comes not from affirming what you believe, but from proving yourself wrong. Beyond the mantra. Learning never ends. It's a beautiful idea, but without scrutiny it becomes meaningless. In the coaching and self-help industries, it often masks the opposite of growth: stagnation disguised as progress, contraction disguised as expansion. Real learning is harder, messier, and far less flattering than the self-help brochures suggest. It requires curiosity, evidence, and a willingness to be uncomfortable. But unlike the illusion, it takes you somewhere. So yes, learning can continue as long as you're alive, but only if you're willing to tell the difference between genuine expansion and the seductive comfort of the echo chamber.